Sunnyvale before the war was still a small town. Everybody knew everybody. We used to shop at all the popular stores like Kirkish and Frank Experry Hardware, and the post office was in town too.
The country was still recovering from the Great Depression. The year was 1938, and FDR declared May 15th National Airmail Week in an effort to promote air travel in the United States. Sunnyvale was always willing to put on a show of it. Here, a ceremonial bag of mail was flown out of Moffett Field to San Francisco. The mail came back just a few hours later. It was the latest in modern communications. This giant leap forward in the mail service was memorialized in film and photographs. You'll notice that the photographer accidentally gets in the camera's frame. That day, everyone got their shot. Not to be outdone, the volunteer fire department took this photo, showing off the progression of their modernization. Though no one can remember where the top half was moved to, the bottom half was left in place and was a part of this commercial structure. After the Depression, but before World War II, Sunnyvale did what it did best: grew produce, packed, canned, and shipped it. Still a small community with a quaint downtown, it was like a Norman Rockwell painting.
I was born in Honolulu, Hawaii, and came to Sunnyvale when I was about 3 years old. My parents came to work at Libby's and Shuckles and the canneries, and grew up here in Sunnyvale and came to Fremont, which unfortunately I didn't get to graduate. I came 3 years to Fremont. The war broke out and I had to go work in the canneries with the folks.
My name is Frank Garcia, born in Sunnyvale in 1923, and lived till high school time, even went to school here. And then, of course, when the war broke out, why, things changed a bit. And Uncle Sam needed me real bad. So he had given me a personal invitation.
By the end of the 1930s, Sunnyvale had already begun to support the war effort. In addition to an Army air base, Sunnyvale's two major canneries, Libby's and Shuckles, were both heavily involved in supporting the war effort. The Hendy Iron Works, a world leader in mining technology before the war, developed giant hydraulic crushers that were used to help build the Panama Canal. Hendy did what it could to stay afloat during the Depression years. They adapted their engineering skills to develop giant gates and valves used in the Hoover Dam and other large structures. They even created standards for streetlights, some of which can still be seen in San Francisco's Chinatown. Many of our local farmers saw the writing on the wall and began moonlighting at the ironworks. But the produce and canning industry continued on. At Shuckles Cannery, young workers mugged for the camera in the summer of 1939. 2 months after this cheery footage was shot, Germany invaded Poland, and the clouds of war began to form over Sunnyvale. A little more than a year later, these workers would gather around a radio to hear the president speak.
Mr. Speaker, members of the Senate, of the House of Representatives, yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy, the United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by
Now the nation had a purpose. Every city, community, and factory was involved in production for the war effort, and the Iron Men of Hendy were going to lead the way. By the 1930s, the Hendy Company was in severe financial distress and had shrunk to only 60 employees. But the government contracts would be the company's salvation. The Navy needed ships, and the Hendy Iron Works built the engines. Lots of engines. Lots of really big engines. The first big contract was to build 118 triple expansion steam engines for the Liberty ships. By the time the war was over, they had built a record 754 reciprocating engines in 3.5 years, which powered 28% of the Liberty ships used in the war, more than any other single plant in the country. In a tribute to the plant, the Navy even named a Liberty ship the Joshua Hendy. The number of employees grew based on these contracts, eventually reaching a peak of 11,500 workers. But where would Hendy house all of these new workers? Wood and other natural resources were scarce, and communities weren't allowed to build new homes during the war. But Sunnyvale was different. It was a strategic city, and that meant that housing only could be built to help house the influx of new workers. This housing development, built right next to the plant, became known as Victory Village. Records indicate that this was one of only 3 new housing developments built in town during the war years. All the industries in town were producing for the war effort, and the Moffett base became the center of West Coast surveillance operations. With Moffett Field's air power and the Hendy Iron Works creating engines for the Navy, Sunnyvale was making a huge contribution to the war effort. Hangars 2 and 3 were built during the war out of wood and concrete, as there was a shortage of steel. They remain 2 of the largest freestanding wooden structures in the world. Throughout the war, the Hendy Iron Works held bond rallies, helping to raise money for the war effort. In 1943, Harry Truman, then a congressman from Washington and soon to be our next president, came to see the factory for himself. Plant manager Charles Moore gave the congressman a personal tour of the massive plant. By 1944, this man would take over the president's office from Franklin Roosevelt, leading our country during the largest war in history. By 1945, this man would make the decision that would end the war.
The world will note that the first atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, a military base. We won the race of discovery against the Germans. We have used it in order to shorten the agony of war, in order to save the lives of thousands and thousands of young Americans.
Within a few days of the ending of the war in the Pacific, government contracts ended and almost 9,000 workers were without a job. As the memory of the war slowly started to fade, Sunnyvale began its transformation from a sleepy small town to a city. By 1954, there were 29 housing developments under construction in the city, which would add another 4,000 homes. This transformation is still happening today.